My name is Richard F. Moore. I came out today to say a few special words about Francis Vaira, a man who grew up at a cattle ranch in the beautiful foothills of California, the mountainous foothills near Jackson, California. Mr. Vaira, coming home from World War II, worked in the education field for 32 years as a teacher, a high school principal, a coach, and 21 years of those as a superintendent of the Jackson Unified School District. During World War II, Mr. Vaira was a Marine. He had a very special duty with the Marine Corps in a radar outfit called Marine Air Warning Squadron 8. Marine Air Warning Squadron 8 had about 300 men and officers. These men operated several different kinds of heavy radar equipment. Well, several different kinds of radar. Some of it was heavy enough to call for 3 or 4 different vans and antenna trailers to operate the set. And this equipment was towed by prime movers and bulldozers into isolated, outlying islands around Okinawa in 1945, starting the 26th of March, 5 days before Americans landed on the Okinawa beaches. These dispersed radar sets would report their information back to a central air defense control center by radio and by telephone. This air defense control center had a reliable operating procedure, a standard operating procedure which was tried and effective by that point of the war. The Air Defense Control Center was responsible for air raid alerts and for directing the flights of American airplanes. I think Mr. Vaira is extremely interesting because of his experience before he joined Marine Air Warning Squadron 8. And it really goes back to the early part of the war, when the Marine Corps found themselves without any Marine Air Warning Squadrons around because they had not been invented yet. The United States and England began sharing radar secrets during late summer of 1940, and this is when the Marines first began learning how to use radar in action when they would travel across the ocean to watch the use of radar in battle against Germany, to observe. And what was learned by this was put to the ultimate test beginning the 7th of August 1942 with the Battle of Guadalcanal. The officers and aviation men at Guadalcanal had knowledge of this radar doctrine, and they had good knowledge of it. But they were not surrounded by men who were familiar with an operating procedure which was effective. So they encountered 3 big drawbacks. The first of which was their radar was not unloaded at the first. It did not come up and running until the airport opened around the 20th of August. 2 days after landing, the Navy pulled out to defend its aircraft carriers, the American Navy. So the Marines on Guadalcanal depended on radio contact with the Australian and New Zealand coast watchers spread out several hundred miles to the north, who would report on incoming air traffic towards Guadalcanal. The second major drawback was the inability to defend against nighttime air raids and the nighttime naval bombardments. The third major drawback was the lack of an operating procedure to coordinate. By the middle of September, the couple or few radar sets online, to coordinate those with anti-aircraft artillery and the other aircraft operations with standardized practice, which everyone was familiar with. And because of these three drawbacks, probably some other reasons thrown in, there was a revision in 1942 in November, which brought about a strong program in North Carolina at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point, a strong revision to build up a defense. So the period we're talking about between November of 1942 and 1943, the summer of 1943, is really the formative period that Mr. Vaira played a role with. And Mr. Vaira's role was during March of 1943. He showed up at Cherry Point and was very soon thereafter sent to Tampa, Florida, to study this lightweight tent radar set, the SCR-602, and he learned all about it from the Army there, the United States Army Air Corps. And after mastering what he learned, he went back to North Carolina. Now, not far from Cherry Point, there's a Marine base, a United States Marine Corps base called Camp Lejeune. Marines would come from Cherry Point and study the 602 radar at Camp Lejeune, and then they would go back to Cherry Point, where they would form up into Marine Air Warning Squadrons. The 1st Marine Air Warning Squadron was commissioned 1st of September 1943. Squadron 2 was commissioned the 25th of September 1943. And Mr. Vaira was there instructing these Marines on how to land the tent radar set. It had electronics inside the tent, and the antenna was outside the tent above the roof, and the tent was only about 6 feet high. And they would practice setting these things up within 20 minutes of landing. They would practice getting them off a landing craft and dragging them up through the sand with two-wheel carts, which they called telephone carts. And they would have these running within 20 minutes. So Mr. Vaira helped several squadrons worth of Marines learn about this tent radar set, until he joined one of these Marine Air Warning Squadrons, Squadron 20, which was commissioned in March of 1944. Marine Air Warning Squadron 8 was also commissioned March of 1944. Working at Camp Lejeune is interesting enough, but on top of that, Mr. Vaira joined Squadron 20. Squadron 20 was a lightweight squadron. It was only about half as big as a heavy squadron like Squadron 8 with the heavy radar vans. Squadron 8 might have had 300 men and officers. Squadron 20 had about 150. And it specialized in the SCR-602 radar. So Mr. Vaira went with Squadron 20, and there were only 4 lightweight squadrons, 5, 10, 15, and 20. Mr. Vaira went with Squadron 20 to California and practiced there through the summer of 1944 around Santa Barbara at a airfield named Goleta and on an island offshore called Santa Rosa. During this period, Marine Air Warning Squadron 8 was also practicing not so far away in the desert, in the Mojave Desert around the Mojave Air Station. And another interesting thing about the summer of 1944 is the only lightweight squadron to see action was busy fighting on Saipan. Marine Air Warning Squadron 5 Air Transportable and Marine Air Warning Squadron 20 Air Transportable both specialized in the use of the tent radar set SCR 602. This set was used in the summer of 1944 with Squadron 5 on the island of Saipan. This radar set received information, electronic return waves from aircraft in the vicinity of the sky. And the problem they ran into was a lot of action made it impossible to use wire communications very effectively during the first stages of the battle. They had to relocate a lot, and the wires were being dug up and exploded and ran over by tractors. So they relied on radios a lot more than they anticipated. Squadron 5, 10, 15, and 20 were disbanded in November of 1944. So the lightweight squadrons 5, 10, 15, and 20 were all disbanded during November of 1944. And those men were parceled out to all the other Marine Air Warning Squadrons, and the ones that had served on Squadron 5 were used along with Mr. Vaira to form these early warning teams. That was the next exciting thing that Mr. Vaira stepped into. These are very special things. Mr. Vaira joined Squadron 8, Marine Air Warning Squadron 8, and went to Hawaii with them, where a man from Squadron 5, Lieutenant James Washington, formed up and trained 6 early warning teams. So these early warning teams would be carrying backpack radios now instead of the lightweight radar sets. So Squadron 8 formed up 3 teams, and Squadron 7 had 3 more, called early warning teams. Each team had 16 men and 2 officers. They carried backpack radios. They landed the very first day of the Okinawa assault, and they carried these backpack radios around listening to the radar reports of the ships on the horizon, and they served the same purpose as those lightweight tent 602 radars, because they were able to disseminate information to the ground troops if there were a lot of them, a lot of bomb raids coming in. With these backpack radios, they could work in the field with different chains of command. You know, 96th Division, a 6th Division, the 1st Division. They're all going in different directions on the island. These are integrated units that are going in different directions on the island. But the men with the backpack radios, they would get their information from a single point now. They all these different spots on the island could pick up from original source to get the same information and disseminate it. That's what's different about the early warning teams. Whereas with the lightweight air warning squadrons, each separate point on the island following the infantry had their own. They had generated their own information right on the spot. So what was really important about Squadron 8 was not just that they provided men for 3 of the 6 early warning teams. Also, is Squadron 8. They provided. I mean, they were positioned to provide an original source of this information on Zamami. and Naganu. They took these radars into these islands 5 days before the battle started, and they were positioned to take control and protect the navies. The Zamami was an anchorage and a haven for the Navy to find refuge. I think they took boats there for repair. They had a seaplane base there. Zamami was a little protected area where there was a seaplane base. They could take over from there if worse came to worse. They could get things in and out of there fast, whatever had to be there in terms of people or equipment, such as we're talking about. So Squadron 8 was ready to from the very beginning to provide that single point of information that would go out to the island, to the infantry. And this is the really special thing about Mr. Vaira, is he played a role through this whole process. And when he oh, by the way, the Navy also had radar ships on the horizon, which were feeding information in to a main ship. It was a control ship. But like I said, Squadron 8 had a ground radar 15 miles offshore doing their job with this whole network of information. Around the 19th of April, when more radar equipment came ashore and got running around Okinawa, the backpack radio teams were called in. Mr. Vaira's team number 1, led by Lieutenant Gerfine, Arthur Gerfine. On the 19th of April, they were called in and received a commendation. At that point, Mr. Vaira resumed his new job, which was now a Master Technical Sergeant in charge of maintenance of these heavy radar vans. He would be familiar with the technical manuals, all the spare parts. He would review the logs and the history of when things were done and when the next step to keep this equipment running smooth throughout the rest of the operation. And even when the ground battle ceased around the 22nd of June 1945, there were still air raids coming in that these men had to be alert for. And by the way, these radar men on Okinawa were the first men to see the kamikaze raids coming on that island. I think it's a really special story. Now, this lightweight 602 radar gear was carried, actually manhandled, in and out of cargo trucks, or often, usually in training, actually pulled along with telephone carts. What they call telephone carts were actually a two-wheeler.
First thing, Rick, you got it on? First thing, Rick, it's a pleasure for me to talk to you about the Marine Corps. I entered the Marine Corps. I went into December 15, 1942. I did my basic training in San Diego. When I finished basic training, I was selected to go to what they call radar school. I had no idea what it was. I thought they said Raiders, and I said, geez, I didn't volunteer for the Raiders, but I found out it was spelled a little different, spelled R-A-D-A-R. So I was happy to hear that. We went to I was transferred to North Carolina, Camp Lejeune, and there I entered a school after being there a week or two. We went into radar school, and there was a group of us that they asked to go on to further study, and it was to learn a portable, very portable gear for the Marine Corps, and the only one that had at that time was the Army. So I don't know exactly how many they were, but there were 6 different classes of us that went down to Drewfield, Florida, and we attended a school instructed by the Army to learn 602. And after we finished that, we were transferred back to North Carolina. After laying there a while, they finally brought us together and they decided to have instruction in 602 at Camp Lejeune. And I was selected to be an instructor. And we lived out on what they call Onslow Beach at that time, which was the Atlantic Ocean in Camp Lejeune. And we lived right out there. We had a little old house we lived in. I guess it was somebody's summer home at that time. And they had a mess hall, and we were there. And I taught operation of 602 radar. And I don't know, I did that for quite a few months. I don't know just how many months, but anyway, I hadn't made enough landings on Onslow Beach to know that I didn't wear the sand out. So from there, I went in one day and talked to the captain. He was a captain with many years' experience. He was back from Guadalcanal, and he said, well, at that time, I think I was a buck sergeant. He said, well, Sergeant, if you transfer out of here, you're going to know you're going to go overseas. And I said, well, that's all right with me. So I was transferred out from being an instructor and sent to Cherry Point, North Carolina. That's where the airborne squadrons were being formed. And there at that time, I was placed in what they call Aircraft Warning Squadron number 20, which was a small group of men. I don't think there's much more than about 80 or 90 of us in the group. I think we're 602 teams were in it. And we had our commanding officer was a Lieutenant Strauss, a captain, and we trained there in Cherry Point. And then they transferred us to Camp Miramar in San Diego. They transferred us to San Diego, and all of a sudden one day they come in, they said they are disbanding A.W.S 20 because they didn't need the assault radar anymore, that they needed just a big 270s and larger units. So I was transferred to A.W.S 8 at that time, which happened to be out in Mojave Desert. So they shipped me out to the Mojave Desert, and I stayed there. They were out on field problems. I never did go on the field problems in Mojave, but in Mojave Desert, I think we were there for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they shipped us back to San Diego to Camp Miramar, and there we packed up our gear, and we headed for Hawaii. And I was trying to remember, I think it was January 1945 we shipped out of San Diego. Took us about 7 or 8 days to get to Hawaii, and we went out on Barbers Point and was set up out there. Then all of a sudden they decided that they needed some early warning teams. And the early warning teams consisted of about 16 enlisted men and 2 officers. Our 2 officers one of them was Lieutenant Art Gerfine, who is at the reunion today, and the other one was Lieutenant Parks, who has passed on. We were then removed from Barbers Point and moved up high in the mountain and on Hawaii, where they had the big 16-inch guns. I don't know just what part of Hawaiian Islands, Oahu it was, but we were up there where they had the 16-inch guns. And we were there for about, they were large ones, they were on wheels, they cranked them in and out. They were supposed to defend the harbor against any kind of attack from ships or anything. They never did fire them. The war was completely different from what they thought they were. They thought they were going to be attacked by ships. And they had these big guns emplacement in the mountains up there, and they rolled them out on wheels, or track, I should say. And we didn't have anything to do with it. We just had our base camp there. And we were up there for about 2 weeks, and then they took us and loaded us on an airplane and said we were headed for the Philippines. And we flew down, and during the war they only let planes fly during the day, especially when they're moving troops. So we flew the first day from Hawaii to the Johnson Islands. Then from the Johnson Islands, next day we flew to a part of the Marshalls, and I don't know if it was Kwajalein or Eniwetok, whatever the closest one is to Pearl Harbor. And then the next day we flew to the last island of the Marshalls. And from there I don't remember whether it was Pettilou or Guam that we flew into, but we flew into one or the other of that. And when we were on Palau Islands and Pettilou, that is for the first time we saw anything in the line of war. The Japs were still on the island of Yap, and they tried to come in at nighttime to make it a landing of boats on the island that we were in, and they had searchlights, and they just shot them out of the water, which was telling us that there was a war going on. And from, I think it was from Guam, we flew directly into Leyte, and Leyte, we landed on, at that time they had made an airfield right on the beach, and they put the landing nets down, that iron mesh landing nets. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but we came in and landed. We were only about maybe 50 yards from the ocean when we landed. We came in and landed, and we were in Leyte, and from there we joined the 564th Gun Battalion of the 96th Army Division, which was up on top of the hill by a town called Tacloban, I think the town was called. And after we were there a few days, the first, probably the second or the third night, they dropped paratroopers on us, but that was taken care of in a hurry by the Army. And from there, we stayed, I don't know how long in the Philippines. I don't remember the dates. But we went down, got aboard ship, and from there we went to Okinawa, and I think it took us 30 days from the island of Leyte to get to Okinawa, which is only a few hundred miles. But we met the convoy, and you woke up one morning, you had ships all around you with the convoy. And Easter Sunday, 1945, we landed on the island. And our outfit, this early warning team, we didn't do any transmitting, but we had little radios, and we did receiving, and we monitored the channels of the Navy and the channels of the Air Force, and our job was to cover the area with the warnings of the air attacks and how many planes were in it, and whether they were bombers or fighter planes that are going to strafe us. And that's what our area consisted of, and we stayed there until we only did this about the first 10 or 12 days. Then they moved into big radar gear, and they took over it with their control centers and everything, and they took over the job that we had. And and I don't know just how long we stayed on the main island, and then out on the island of Zamamishima, A.W.S. 8 had a 270 unit up on top of the mountain, and the gas tank got blown up by the Japanese, and we had high casualty, so they needed replacement of technicians out there. So I was sent out there as a technician on a Spimlin at that time, I think it was called. I don't know if I'm just right on the names of these units anymore or not, but that's what it was. And I stayed there until the war was over, and then we would move back to the main island of Okinawa, and we were down and we set up a base camp in the southern tip of the island called Point Dog. It was near the Suicide Cliffs, and that's where we were, and we stayed there until I came home on points.
What kind of instruction did you give the men when you were on Camp Lejeune?
I taught operations. I taught how to set it up and operate the unit. I didn't teach the technique, but I was on the operation end of it. We came in, and we landed in 6 telephone carts, and we used to come in, and with the LSVP, they dropped the ramp down. We'd run off of the 6 telephone carts, go in and set it up, see how soon we could set it up. We could do it in about, I think we got, from the time they hit the beach to the time we had it set up was about 18 to 20 minutes. We were on the air. And that was the main thing that we taught there.
How many times a day would you come in and land on?
Well, each group we would take in a couple times. So we'd only come in one time a day because you were getting wet and everything and set up. Then maybe 2 or 3 days later, we'd make another landing with the same group. And every group that she sent through, and I think the operation school was 8 weeks or something like that. I don't remember what it was. But the main thing was how to set up, get the power plant operating, and go from there.
In 8 weeks, you would have only one group to work with?
Yes, we had one group. And we went to school 24 hours a day. They went to school either from 8 in the morning to 8 at night, or 8 at night to 8 in the morning. And they rotated through every couple of weeks. You changed from day to night school, whatever you went to. But that's the way the school went 24 hours a day to get people through there and train them.
So you would work a 12-hour shift?
I worked a 12-hour shift, right.
Sometimes it was a night shift?
Sometimes it was a night shift, sometimes it was a day shift, depending.
And the same one group would have both night and day training?
Yes, they would say take 2 weeks a day, then 2 weeks a night, 2 weeks a day. They'd have about 4 weeks of night and about 4 weeks of day to go through the school. And then they were moved on and moved out and into, I guess they went from there to Cherry Point, went into a different squadron. Because see, there was A.W.S. 1, 2, 3, clear up. I was on 20.
What was the date that you started training? Do you know about what month you started into this Camp Lejeune?
Then I got to Camp Lejeune. I got there in March of 1943. And then I went to Florida. And I think we went to 8 or 10 weeks school down there. And we came back to North Carolina.
You were with the Army in Florida?
Yes.
Learning about...
Army Air Base, Drew Field, Tampa, Florida.
And that's where you first learned about the 602?
Yes. See, the Marine Corps didn't have it, and the Army did. And they only had it at like a place called Drew Field. And then they were also, there was different classes going through. Some were Army, some were Marines. And we went through the school down there. They were Army instructors when we went down there.
And after Drew Field...
Then you came back to Camp Lejeune. And then the Marine Corps thought they should start their own. But then they had some gear, gear to train with.
Do you suppose you might have trained the first Marines that ever used a 602?
I think we did. Because it was the first time the Marines had it, and we were the instructors for it.
And
Yes.
how long were you there?
You know, I don't recall. I know I came to the, let's see, this was 43. I probably was there in Camp Lejeune most of 43. And I left there, it's hard to say. I know I went there and then we shipped out. So because it was formed at Cherry Point, and it took a while to get them in, and we trained there at Cherry Point, and then we went from there to we were in San Diego, and the Marines had a base in Santa Barbara, and we went up there. A.W.S. 20 went up there to train at Santa Barbara, and we had a 602 there. We had 2 of them. We had one of them up on the coast, and one of them out in Santa. It was about 35 miles out in the ocean, and there was an Army radar out there and an Army base. So they sent us out there with the 602, and we set that up and operated a 602 out there on
Santa Rosa.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, there's 3 islands here, but there wasn't anything on. These other ones weren't occupied.
There's Santa Barbara off on
Yeah.
California,
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah. See, we just took a ship from there out to here.
which is just off the coast of Santa Barbara. And we went from there back to Miramar. Came from the East Coast to Miramar. Miramar, they sent us 20 up to Santa Barbara, which was Goleta Airfield, a Marine Air Force Base at Goleta, which, by the way, happens to be the campus of the University of California at Santa Barbara right now. It's the old Marine base. So we went from, and we stayed there, I don't know how long I stayed there. Well, we were there for 3 or 4 months in training in Santa Barbara, because we were right on the coast with this one 602 unit, and we were out on the island with the other one. And as technicians, we traded back and forth. We spent, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks out on the island, and the rest of the time we did Santa Barbara. Sorry, I left that out when I was talking about it. Okay, I think that's about it.
What was the mission and theory of an air warning squadron such as 20? How is that different from the other kind?
We were what they call an assault squadron. We went in earlier than, to go in to make a landing, they got to go in and get secured, and they got to get a beachhead, they used to call it, and then they have to get it secured. To bring in like the 270, the 270 at that time was the main radar, but it would have 2 big vans, and you had to either pull them with a tractor or pull them with a big semi-truck. Well, our 602, we just landed with 6 telephone cards, so we were what they call an assault type. We went in earlier, say the first wave went in, the second wave, and so on. As soon as they got a beachhead in there, and we went in, our job was to go in and set up and give them air coverage with 602, which is different than an A.W.S. 8. A.W.S. 8 was a big units, which took a longer beachhead and things like that, to more security, because you had to go in and you had to move the equipment with some other kind of power unit, like such as a truck or a tractor.
Were there other sections of A.W.S. 20, like a control center or a
Yeah, there was a control center, but it was not nearly like the control center they talk now. See, there was just a small control center that went in after, say, they made an invasion and they took 3 602 sets. Well, after they report to a control center, because the control center controlled it all, and they broadcast it out, where were the attacks coming from, and they estimated how many planes and so forth from there.
How would they contact the control center?
Well, we either done it by radio or by telephone wire. We had a telephone man that ran the telephone wire. And by the way, I didn't know if you know it, but the telephone wire in that time had 2 strands of steel in it and the rest copper. And the steel made the wire stronger. I don't know if you knew that or not. We had stranded wire, and let's say there was 5 strands to it. Well, there's more than that. There was about 8 strands to it. Well, 3 of them were steel, and the other 5 were copper. The steel really didn't transmit. The steel was for strength. When you strung a line, if you strung it across, it gave it strength to hold it, see. And that was different than today.
So when you were on the island,
Okinawa?
no, off of California,
Oh, yes.
you had a radio there?
Yeah, we radioed into the control tower. The control base was in at the Goleta Air Base, and we radioed in the information, because see, it was all set up. In fact, the island was, it wasn't a very big island. It just had one little, you had to come in on a little tiny boat. You just had one little pier that came out, and it had one road, from one end of the island to the other, and there wasn't anything living out there but servicemen. It was.
Now here's a boat that we rode out on. It went from Santa Barbara to Santa Rosa Island right there.
Why would they be divided into 3s anyway?
Well, in case one gets blown up, if you go in, you locate here, I locate there, and there's if you lose one, you're not off in the air. See, that's the idea of it. That's what they were careful of, because you didn't want to lose control of things. And if you got one of them blowing up, just like we out in Zamamishima, when we lost that 270 out there, it was off until they could get a replacement. Newer and a more modern gear, and you get better coverage, and the scope was better to read and everything. So this is the idea of the location. One went in one place on an invasion, one went in another, so on. So we had coverage, and it all came into one area. By the time near the end of the war, 602s were obsolete. Because, see, they didn't need it. They had better coverage from the ships, they had better coverage from the planes, and they had better coverage from the bigger units that they could get in. In other words, the ship's radar took care of it until they could get in and get set up with the larger units.
How far from the ocean was your early warning team operating on Okinawa?
Oh, we set up, we weren't in very far the first day we went in and set up. We were just, actually, I don't even remember what beach we went in on, but they had 4 different beaches. You know, that was a pretty big operation in Okinawa. They went in with 2 Marine divisions and 2 Army divisions, and they hit different places. And I don't know, you've probably read about this. Then there was 2 Marine division in reserve and Army division in reserve, and they really faked like they were going to hit the southern end of the island, and that's where the Japs thought we were coming in. When they did, we come up and hit it in the middle. And you know, the first day they went across the island. See, they really didn't reach too much. The frontline troops really didn't make too much resistance. Then it got nasty after we got in and got it told. So we went in and set up. We weren't too far in, and we set up and got operating our early warning team.
What day was that you came in?
First, it was the afternoon of the first day.
What day was that?
April 1st, 1945.
And what did
Easter Sunday.
Did you carry any equipment with you?
Oh yeah, we had all of us had a weapon, and then we carried our radios and our thing. I don't know, we might even had a telephone card to carry it in. I don't remember that. Because see, we had what they call a little, I think it was a TBX radio receiver. We had 2 of those in case one went out. My job was to maintain those. I happened to be the NCO in charge, so I don't think I carried it. But Marv Gettleman was a sergeant with me. He's down there today. And I think there's 3 or 4 of us from that early warning team there yet. Yes. Well, we had parts and things. If something went out, you went through and checked it and replaced it, and from your training, your technical training. We had it ready to go when we got in there. It was ready to run. You know, we hoped it was tuned up and ready to go. We were on the frequency that we were supposed to be listening to get the. Actually, we listened to the Navy frequency because they were the ones from way out, and they. In fact, our outfit had some people who went in 5 days before the invasion, and they were on one of the small islands, and you heard the people talking about it down there, and they were set up with a 270. And they were feeding information, and we just picked up that on a radio frequency, and we plotted it coming in to say there were so many Betty bombers or so many zeros coming in from a certain place, and we were going to be strafed or we were going to be bombed or so on. In fact, we had, when we finally moved up to the high part of the island, we sandbagged an area and put it in with a little enclosement so that they wouldn't have to worry about the people operating in there, or wouldn't have to worry about strafing and things like that.
You had at first you did not have sandbags.
No, we didn't. No, we just dug a hole and operated.
You dug in a hole?
Yeah, a little foxhole like, and we operated from there, and a little plotting board. It was kind of crude, but it got the job done.
And how long were you in this first area?
Well, I don't remember whether it was a day or 2, but then we finally moved up on the hill where the reception is better and everything was better. And we really built up kind of a little permanent base because, you know, ours was only a temporary duty till they could get in and get the bigger ones, which were more accurate and you could control it.
Was there a roof over you?
We had like a tent tarp over the head of us.
At both places or just up on the hill?
Oh, just up on the hill. Mainly when we first came in, you just set up and went to work, and the main idea was to give coverage from the air attacks.
Did you sleep inside of the sandbag enclosed area?
You know, each one of us had our own foxholes.
Outside of that?
Yes. And they had a duty crew, you know, and I don't know whether our crew consisted of 2 or 3 people, one a plotter and one a receiver, monitoring the channels. A plotter is a guy who had the map and located where it was coming from. For instance, let's say we got a radio communication. 30 zeros come from 090, which would be 90 degrees at so many thousand feet at 100 miles out. So when they got within 30 miles, then we flash red. It was for the troops to get ready because they were going to be attacked within a few minutes. And we flashed the caution when they were 100 miles out, saying, "Hey, we're going to be attacked." The caution flash. It was our job to flash the warning to the troops.
What is that like? Flashing a warning? What do you do?
You know, I don't remember just exactly how we flashed it out. To tell you the truth, we must have radioed out. Must have been. You know, I don't remember that.
Did you have?
Actually, this is the first time I've talked about this since 1945. Do you know that? I really have never talked about this. So there's been a lot of water under the bridge.
Did you have a siren there, or did you?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
That's probably the way we broadcasted it, with the siren. We gave a warning with a siren.
How did that operate?
It was hand cranked, just like you showed it right there. In those days, that's the way they were. We didn't have that much electricity, you know, electronics.
Was the siren carried in by your team?
Yes. Our job was to warn the ground troops about the air. That's where we got the early warning Squadron 8, see, A.W.S 8, or A.W.S 20, early warning.
Did you work with the control center of the gun battalion that you were attached to, the Army battalion?
You know, I can't tell you that, because I don't know. They welcomed us with open arms. The Army did. They appreciated us.
Well, then you went to Zamami, or did you spend some more time back at the A.W.S 8 camp?
Well, you know, I don't remember what we did. When we got through with they relieved us of one duty, you follow me? And I don't know how long the timeline it was from we got relieved to go to Zamami. And all I know is that I went out there as a replacement for the people that got blown up. And it was up on top of the island.
And the SPIM was already there?
Yeah, the unit was already moved up there. Well, they had a road up there. They drove up there when I got there. They had made a road up to the top of the mountain. And they had to do it to get the 270 up there. You know, you couldn't move the thing unless you moved it with a tractor.
When you first came to Zamami, was the SPIM already set up?
Yes, it was.
And what did you do for the SPIM?
I was a technician and took a regular shift. You know, say I was crew A or crew B or crew C. It was on 24 hours a day, and different crews came in at different times to relieve them. While on crew A, I was the technician. It was my responsibility to keep this thing running.
How would you do that?
Well, if we broke down, then we'd go to take our instruments and try to find out where our trouble was and make the correction and get back on the air. If we weren't transmitting out, getting a signal, we weren't getting our job done. See, that's why they put us up there on top of the hill, because you get bigger range. You see, radar won't go over a curve, right? That's why you only get a certain range from it. Like, I think the most they ever had is maybe 150 miles or something.
Did you have a repair shack or something where you did testing on this electronics?
No, you just went to work on the unit.
Right inside?
You had the spare parts. You had in those days they had tubes, and you had condensers and resistors, and if something burned up, you just take the solder, the gun, and just solder it and put it in, put a new unit in, put a new piece in. It was your job to go through and isolate where the trouble is. But you could tell if the trouble was in the receiving end or the transmitting end. You had an idea where to go. They had different components. They had receivers, they had transmitters, and different components in the unit that you could just go on. And some of them even had complete new components. Say a receiver went out and you had a unit, especially these big ones, and you slip another receiver, then you could work on this.
Well, when you took out the one that was not working and you put in a good one, the one you took out, did you take it somewhere to work on it?
Well, I think we probably had a little work area someplace. You know, where we had all our instruments. In those days, we didn't have too sophisticated instruments either, because you had when you went through and checked continuity to make sure that the signal went through, and you check it out that way.
Did you have a store of spare parts somewhere?
Oh yeah, we had plenty of spare parts.
Where were they kept?
They were kept in a watertight box, you know. And, you know, you just go in there and whatever you wanted. You read the color on the resistor, and that told you how big a resistor you had. I forgot that. They were all, in those days, the resistors and the condensers all had colors on. Red represented so much, green another, brown another, and tell you the value of it, and then you go to your supply and get it out. And I've even forgot all that stuff. I really never worked with it. I never worked with electronics since the service. When we got Point Dog set up, the war was over. I was out on Zamami when the war ended, and I won't forget, because first thing they came around, and somebody probably already told you this, they warned us that the Japs were going to drop gas. The last thing they were going to drop gas on us. So we had to get our gas masks out. You know, in those days everybody carried a gas mask, but in a gas mask you had to seal the canister off, watertight, so you didn't get water into it. Then you had two clamps that you put on the hose that came around to keep the water out of from the face mask down and going into there. You put a clamp, and those are on there when you went ashore, because sometimes you got pretty wet going ashore, and if your canister got wet, then it would just deteriorate and you wouldn't have any protection. So most of us use the gas mask as a pillow. See, it was kind of soft and everything. And so we got this a warning out there that the Japs were going to take the final thing. They were going to drop gas bombs on us. So everybody tried to dig out their gas mask, and most of us hadn't done anything with it. We had just carried it, and where that clamp was on, the hose was squashed. It really wouldn't have done us much good, because you figure that's it. But with the hot weather and everything, and the clamps, there were two hose clamps, like you just put across there, one at each end of the hose. And then the next morning came out that the Japs surrendered. And we were a happy bunch. And I'd just like to finish it off by saying they probably saved an awful lot of lives by dropping that bomb. Because we were getting ready to make the invasion of Japan, and they just wouldn't, everybody would have been killed. And a lot of us, because you'd have fought women, children, and everybody. So that's about the best I can do for you, Rick.
You haven't worked on electronics since then?
No, I haven't.
What have you been doing?
Well, I went to college, and I went into education, and I put 32 years in education. I ended up being superintendent of schools the last 21 years there in Jackson. I started off as an instructor, and I taught mechanical drawing, wood shop, and a little math, and I was one of the coaches, and I coached for about 11 years, or 10 years I guess it was. And then I went into administration. I kept going on to college and got my administrative credential, and then I became principal of the high school, and I became superintendent of the district. And I retired after 32 years.
What high school district or?
Jackson Unified, here in the community of Jackson, California, Jackson Unified School District. I was their superintendent for 21 years. So, I didn't need electronics.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I was glad to do it, Rick. Thank you.